The Tale of the Queen of the Dunes. Neither here nor there, but long ago, there once lived a slave named Naji, who was indentured to a cruel merchant. Every day and night Naji suffered at his hands, for he beat her ruthlessly and without reason. She spent many torturous years serving him until one day she fled in the middle of a sandstorm. She ran until she could run no more, then collapsed in a secluded valley and prayed to the gods for help. Much to her surprise, one of the gods responded and, in a silk-soft voice, guided her further into the valley to the wondrous palace concealed behind the veil of sand. Naji was so starstruck she forgot her exhaustion and explored the palace with the giddy innocence of a child. Eventually, she came to a throne room that was so filled with splendid decor it made even her master's wealth pale by comparison. At the back of the room was a beautiful throne, and sitting atop it was a woman with porcelain white skin and midnight black eyes. "Welcome, my esteemed guest," she cried, and Naji recognized the voice that had led her to the palace. "Please stay and rest a while, Habibti. I will prepare food and entertainment for you." Naji was so grateful she could have cried, but no sooner had she beheld the performers than her good cheer vanished, for what she saw was a mockery of life. The dancers were nothing but human shells with hollow eyes. Like puppets, they danced and sang on the command of Naji's hostess. When they were done, Naji collapsed to her knees and clasped her hostess's cold hands. "You have been so very kind to me, Sayyidati, but I must beg your leave. I am being chased by a dangerous man, and I do not want to bring him to your palace." "Do not worry for me, child. I fear no man. No, it is they who fear me." Her hostess smiled warmly. "Would you like me to dispose of this monster for you?" Naji was so in awe of her hostess's courage that she forgot about her unnatural performers. "Could you truly stop him from pursuing me?" "Oh, I can do that and much more. I can make all your wishes come true, even the impossible ones." Her dark eyes glittered with distant stars. "Of course, all wishes have a price. In order for me to perform such a feat, I will require something from you." Naji was so desperate she immediately lowered her head and asked how she could serve. This is what her hostess told her. "In order to perform my magic, I must leave this place, and for that I require your body." She lifted the circlet of golden bones from her head and handed it to Naji. "Clasp this around your neck, and I shall give you the power to destroy your nightmares." Naji did as commanded, and while her hostess withered away to smoke and ash, Naji was filled with a fearsome, terrible power. Her hunger and thirst vanished, replaced by an insatiable desire for revenge. She returned to the desert, traveling miles, until she reached the campsite of her cruel master. He had hired mercenaries to help track Naji down, and was shocked when she appeared before them. "So, you returned, slave," the merchant approached, holding a whip. "Will you beg me for forgiveness, or will I have to punish you?" Naji raised her head and looked her former master straight in the eyes. "I will never beg you for forgiveness again." She lifted her arms and called to the dark magic in her veins. Creatures made of torn flesh and bone answered her call, emerging from the sand with howls of rage. When the merchant and his men fled, the ghouls chased after them like hounds, breaking their bones and shredding their hearts. Afterwards, Naji called the creatures back to her. She was shocked when the corpses of the slain men rose and shambled toward her too. She stepped back with a cry. "What foul magic is this?" Her hostess laughed inside her mind and said, "My dear girl, this is the magic of the Queen of the Dunes. My magic. And now that I am free, you have unleashed it upon the world." Naji had never known a fear as deep as the one she felt then. For the Queen of Dunes was no mortal woman. She was one of the 7 Jinn kings. She tried to pry the circlet of bones from her neck, but to no avail. The Queen of Dunes laughed. "Our deal is not yet done, Habibti. I have destroyed your nightmares, so now you are obliged to hand your body over to me. Do not mourn, dear girl. Together we will be indestructible." Then the wicked Queen of Dunes snuffed out Naji's thoughts as easily as one extinguishes a candle, and began to plot. She led her army through the desert and to a brilliant human city where she met with the wali who governed it. She promised the city's guardian power, the likes of which he had never seen, if he provided her with shelter. The greedy man accepted her deal and did not mourn when she killed his soldiers, for she reanimated their corpses and made them into a fearsome, undying army. The wali was so in awe of the queen's magic that he forgot to be afraid. This was his most dire mistake. Weeks after she took over his armies, the Queen of Dunes murdered him on a barren battlefield. "A heartless man needs no heart," she proclaimed, as she tore the man's beating heart from his chest, before commanding his corpse to follow her. The Queen of Dunes wandered the desert for many years, building her army of the dead. They built her a palace, one even more magnificent than the ruins Naji had found her in. It was there that she resided for years, content to be worshipped and feared. Then came Munakid, a peasant from a nearby settlement. He, unlike the rest of the townsfolk, refused to worship the queen. "The jinn are blasphemers, banished by the gods for their wickedness," he told the others, "and the 7 kings are the worst of all, for they are the root of that evil." He sought a way to end the queen's reign of terror. His plan brought him to her palace, where he prostrated himself before her and offered false prayers. Day after day he returned and showered the queen with praise. The Queen of Dunes was bemused by his dedication and decided to let him stay at the palace so he could serve her. She kept him alive, for she liked to see his expression war between adoration and fear. Over time she began to trust him. One day, as they were walking through her dust-filled courtyard, Munakid asked about her appearance. "You possess the divine beauty of a goddess. What inspired your form?" "I am but a shadow of what I once was. In order to exist in this world, I require a vessel. This body was an offering." She smiled fondly as she stroked the bones at her throat. Munakid understood what he had to do. When nighttime came, he made his way to the queen's bedroom, silencing any ghouls who stepped in his path. He found her slumbering in her bed and pried the circlet from her neck before she woke. What had been impossible for Naji was possible for Munakid, for he was not bound by magic. He threw the circlet to the ground, grabbed Naji, and ran from the palace, even as the queen's ghouls gave chase. He was bleeding and exhausted by the time he escaped, and still he heard the queen's voice in his mind. "Traitor!" she cried. "Terrible traitor!" Munakid was beginning to fear he might have to suffer her voice forever when a sandstorm hit and drowned out the sound. He sought shelter in a cave and held Naji to him as the storm raged. When it was over, he stepped outside and saw that where the palace had been, there was now nothing but a huge hill of golden sand. "The gods have heard my prayers," Munakid whispered. "They have buried the Queen of Dunes once more. Now we are all free." Munakid returned to the cave and found yet another miracle. Naji, revived. He took her hand, and together they walked back to the settlement. Munakid's victory was celebrated all across the desert kingdom, and the people once again knew peace. Hundreds of years have passed since his resounding victory, but beware, fair desert folk, for peace is a fragile promise. If you ever come into the desert and hear a voice from your memory offering you your greatest desires, turn away from it. That path is filled with broken and deadly lies.